Welcome to Sky Studios in West London. Tonight, the final two candidates hoping to be the next Prime Minister will face questions from Conservative Party members and from me. I'm Kay Burley. This is Liz Truss, of course, and Rishi Sunak as well. Good evening to you both. For the next 90 minutes, they'll be answering questions from some of the people who will decide their future. This is the battle for number 10. Good evening and welcome to the battle for number 10. The struggle for voters between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak comes to a head tonight here at Sky News. For weeks, the candidates for Conservative leader have debated, but only now are the people who'll pick them finally getting the delayed chance to vote. The backdrop, a country predicted to be about to plunge into recession. It really is make or break. Tonight, we have more than 60 Conservative members and others in our audience, largely reflecting the demographic makeup of the party. Many of them are still undecided over who to back. In a format that's different and we hope perhaps more illuminating than other events, the two candidates will separately face questions from the audience and then face mine in an extended, in-depth interview. We tossed a coin before we came on air. Who won? Liz Truss won, and she chose to go first. She is with us now. Are you happy with it? Good evening. It's nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see you. Are you happy with the format?
I'm very happy with the format.
Ready for the first question?
Yes, excited.
Here we go. Let's start with our first question, and that is Diana, who's here on the front row. Good evening, Diana. What's your question for Liz Truss?
My question for Liz is, the Bank of England have said that a recession is inevitable. What could you do to mitigate the impact of this?
Well, what the Bank of England have said today is, of course, extremely worrying. But it is not inevitable. We can change the outcome and we can make it more likely that the economy grows. And what's important is, first of all, that we need to help people struggling with the cost of living. I would immediately reverse the national insurance increase. I would also have a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy to save people money on fuel bills. But I'd also keep corporation tax low, to make sure that we are attracting investment into our economy and doing all we can to avoid a recession. Because I know what it's like when people lose their jobs, when towns and cities across our country struggle. I don't want our country to go through that. That's why it's so important we keep taxes low and we do all we can to grow the economy by taking advantage of our post-Brexit freedom, unleashing investment, changing things like the procurement rules and doing things differently. But now is the time to be bold, because if we don't act now, we are headed for very, very difficult times.
Are you happy with that?
I am. That's good to hear. Thank you.
OK, anybody else going to follow up on that one for us? Nobody at this stage. We're just warming you up still, aren't we? OK, well, I've got one. You're confident that you'll be able to avert a recession by the end of the year?
Well, what we know at the moment is a recession is predicted by the Bank of England. And what we need to make sure is we're using all the tools at our disposal, keeping taxes low, doing the reforms we need to our economy to get growth going faster, to encourage people to set up businesses, to encourage businesses to invest. And I want us to be on the side of people who work hard, people who do the right thing, people who support their families, people who set up businesses. And that's why it's so important we don't burden them with excess regulation, but that we also keep taxes low. Under the current proposals, our corporation tax would go up to the same level as France and 10 points ahead of Ireland. And I really worry about our capacity to attract that investment into our economy if we do that. Okay. You simply can't tax your way to growth. And I'm afraid the very high taxes we have at the moment, a 70-year high, are likely to lead to a recession.
OK.
And that's what the Bank of England is predicting.
OK, Neha is here. Neha, good evening to you. What's your question for Ms Truss?
Hi, Liz. My question is, I'm amongst very few in my age group and ethnicity that are actually members of the Conservative Party. I've been speaking to some of us, and we are afraid that the party has lost credibility. So my question is, how will you repair the damage to the party's reputation?
Well, the most important thing is we deliver on the promises we made. We got elected across the country in 2019. Because of our manifesto, we said we'd unleash opportunity, that we would grow the economy, that we would keep taxes low. So we need to deliver on all of those things. We need to deliver on the opportunities of Brexit. And when we promise something, we need to follow through on it. I think that's really important. But I also want the Conservative Party to be a party that reaches out to everybody across the country, gets new people on board, encourages people to join our party, because we've got some fantastically talented MPs, but we need a new generation of members. And I would appoint a really strong party chairman to encourage that to happen.
Any clues?
I have not. I am definitely, Kay, not being premature. We're still in the middle of a leadership race, and what I'm about is about talking to our party members about my policies for government. But what I can say is I would always make sure I appointed people to my cabinet on the basis of merit and people that get things done, because what people really want us to do is deliver. And we've only got 2 years. It's not a long amount of time, and we need to get started straight away. So I want people from all parts of the party, from all parts of the country, who can really get on and deliver.
OK, politicians always say that our party is a broad church, and I always point out to them that people die in Broadchurch. I know. Let's bring it... I know.
That Kay is worse than the earlier pun. That is worse than the earlier pun.
We'll keep that between ourselves. Nashava has got a question for us.
Hi.
Just here. Hi.
Good evening, Liz. I'm a medical consultant. I work in a hospital, and I see day in, day out the relentless pressure that our medical staff is having. Now, understaffing is a real issue at this moment in time. If you become the next Prime Minister, how will you solve this?
Well, first of all, the NHS has done a fantastic job in COVID, but we are facing a huge backlog, and that is putting huge pressure on. First of all, I'd make sure we're putting the recent funding we allocated, the 13 billion, into social care, because there are many people who are in hospital who ought to be in social care, but there aren't the beds available. So I'd first of all make sure we're investing the money in social care. I'd also support our doctors and nurses more by removing some of the central diktats and also having fewer layers of management. On the campaign trail over the last few weeks, I've met people who face 7 or 8 layers of management above them. And I think that can be quite difficult and quite demotivating. And what we need is more of the empowerment, more of the decisions to be made by people on the front line. There are also a number of other issues we need to look at, like doctors' pensions. I've met a lot of doctors who've gone into retirement because of the specific issues around their pensions. I need to sort that out. And also, there are many doctors who very kindly came out of retirement to help during COVID. You know, help with the vaccination programme, help with the real issues we face in our hospitals. And what I'd like to do is see what we can do to encourage those people to come back into the profession and really help, because we do face serious issues. It is difficult to get a GP appointment. I represent a rural area. We've got real problems with ambulance waiting times as well. So we need all hands on deck. But I really believe that it's by trusting people on the front line, trusting the professionals more, and making the organisation a really great place to work, that we will actually solve these problems together.
Want to come back on that?
I will say that I know that people that I work with will be really, really happy if you looked into pension tax, because a lot of people are going into early retirement.
Exactly.
So I'm sure that will help bring the waiting lists down and, you know, help the road for recovery as well. So thank you.
Thank you. But we also need to listen to people like you who are actually involved in the health service and listen to your advice. Because what I've heard is lots of areas where we could use our facilities better. So, for example, I met a doctor who told me that he wanted to go in and work at the weekend, use the equipment of the weekend, but actually he'd been banned from more senior people in the organisation from doing that. So there are things like that that I think we can empower people to do things differently and really treat this as a major national programme to deal with the aftermath of COVID. Okay. We were very successful at dealing with COVID, getting the vaccine, rolling out the vaccine, but now we have a major issue with the National Health Service, and we need all of the best brains working on it.
Just to clarify, are you suggesting that you should sack layers of management?
No, I'm not. What I'm suggesting is that we need to deploy people in the National Health Service better. And what I have heard is that there's been a lot of targets set centrally by the Department of Health and NHS England, and I want things to be decided more locally, so there's less distance between the people making the decisions and the people actually on front line helping the patients.
Lots of people want to ask you questions, Ms Truss. I think David from Guildford. David, where are you? Hand up, David. Where is he? There he is. He's just here. David, you've got a question on Ukraine, I believe.
I have. I thought it was going to Rishi, I must admit.
Oh, well.
But I'm perfectly
There we
happy.
are.
How would you propose to broker peace negotiations in Ukraine as opposed to continuing to provide arms to prolong the state of war?
Well, the only way this war will end is when the Russians leave Ukraine. And we need to make sure that we enable the Ukrainians to defeat Vladimir Putin. If there's any failed peace settlement, if there's any giveaway of Ukrainian territory, what we know from history is Russia will just come back for more. We saw that with the Minsk Accords, which didn't work. And we know what Vladimir Putin's plans are. He said that he wants to create a greater Russia, essentially the old Soviet Union, including the likes of the Baltic states. So that is why it's so important that we were the first European country to supply weapons to Ukraine, and we need to continue to do that. But we also need to work with our allies like the Americans, who are also putting weapons into Ukraine. We also need to toughen up the sanctions on Russia, because at the moment, the way Putin is able to fund his appalling war machine is because of the oil and gas revenues that he's getting. And so that means us finding alternative sources, particularly in the UK. We have the North Sea. We can invest in more nuclear, but it also involves other countries finding alternative sources as well. Because what Putin has done is he's used Europe's dependence on Russian gas to hold the whole continent to ransom. And that is appalling. And we know the end result of what happens when dictators get appeased.
Is that every inch of territory that's been taken since 2014?
Well, I certainly think it would be wrong for us to give away any territory on behalf of the Ukrainians. Now, of course, President Zelensky, ultimately is the person who has to determine what an eventual peace deal would look like. And he has been very clear that Russia needs to leave the entirety of the Ukrainian territory. But I think it would be completely wrong for the United Kingdom, or indeed any other country, to say Ukraine should give up part of their territory. That would be very wrong. And what I worry is the lesson it would give to aggressors around the world if Russia was seen by saber-rattling, by lining up troops on the border, lining up tanks on the border, then successfully gaining a piece of Ukrainian territory.
Sure.
What message would that send to others around the world? It would be a terrible message, and the long-term threat to global security would be appalling.
David?
No, I just wondered if you didn't mention anything about attempting to negotiate or broker some peace deal.
We have been involved in working on negotiations with our American, French and German colleagues, and we are providing support to the Ukrainians to do just that. But it is ultimately about what the Ukrainians are willing to negotiate. What I don't want to see is Ukraine be put under any pressure to give up territory for expediency's sake, because I'm saying it simply won't be expedient, because all we'll see is Russia retreat and then come back for more later. And they still haven't given up their ambitions to take the whole of Ukraine. It was a tactical retreat away from Kiev, not a long-term retreat. And we need to be very, very worried about Putin's intentions. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that I favour raising our defence spending to 3% of GDP over the next decade.
Still got lots of questions to get through.
Sorry.
So if I may, no, not at all. I want to bring in our next question, which is about housing, and it's from Jude from Chippenham, and I've wanted to say this all evening. Hey, Jude.
Hey, Kate, thank you very much. Hello, Foreign Secretary. I've recently graduated and will be moving to London to start a new job as a commercial lawyer. When I made the decision, I thought, perhaps naively, that it would make sense to buy somewhere in London rather than rent. But that was before I saw the cost of a deposit on a starter home. How will you solve the housing crisis and make it easier for young people to own their own home?
Jude, I think it's incredibly important that we help more people get on the housing ladder. It is a problem that this generation of young people end up buying houses much later in their lives than previous generations. But the way to do it is not the system we have at the moment, which is Soviet-style top-down housing targets, which simply cause huge concern and don't actually deliver the results we want. And before I became an MP, I was a councillor. I sat on a planning committee. It was hours of my life I'll never get back because we didn't have any control over what happened. Everything got overruled by the planning inspectorate in Bristol. So what I want is a much more localised system of planning. So in London, for example, I think there's more opportunity to build up in London, to build more higher storey buildings. I think in other parts of the country, what we need is more investment zones where we have industry developed alongside homes, alongside infrastructure, and that can be determined by local people. But the one-size-fits-all planning system we have at the moment simply doesn't work. The other thing I do to help you specifically is when somebody does rent, they should be able to use their rental history towards getting a mortgage for their home. And that will help people who are long-term renters get onto the housing ladder.
OK, just want to share this quote with you that you, I think it was 3 years ago, perhaps a little bit longer. We need to build 1 million homes on the London Green Belt near railway stations and around other growing cities, specifically to allow the under 40s to be able to own their own homes. Do you still want to build 1 million homes on Green Belt and the like?
So what I don't want to do, Kay, is build it on the Green Belt. Because I do think, well, I've changed my view on that. I'm still very keen for the under 40s to be able to own their own homes. But what I've seen is that the way these top-down targets have resulted in having the opposite effect of getting the homes built. And I'm now of the view that what we need to do is have incentives to get local councils to set up investment zones and do things differently, because the current system isn't working.
OK, so you've changed your mind on that one. Jill from Tunbridge Wells. Are you angry, Jill?
Just a bit. Well, disgusted. Hi, Liz.
Hi.
How important is it to balance the books?
So the answer is, it is important over the long term to make sure that the private sector is growing faster than the public sector and we are able to generate the revenues for our economy and also be able to pay for our public services. But it isn't right to try and balance the books straight away when we've had a major global crisis like COVID, and every single country in the world has built up debts from that crisis. And in fact, we have lower levels of debt than most of the G7 countries. So I think trying to balance the books prematurely is actually counterproductive, because if you put up taxes and you stop businesses forming, you stop new investment and you stop economic growth, you're less likely to be able to pay down the debt over the longer term.
Happy with that?
No.
Doesn't look as though you
No,
are.
not
So what's your follow-up question on that one?
Liz, I do not want to see my children and my grandchildren encumbered with huge debt at a time of rising interest rates, Bank of England today, and at a time of high inflation. The one thing Margaret Thatcher believed in was sound money. This is not sound economics. And the whole business about economic growth, tax cuts do not necessarily produce economic growth. If you look at Germany, for example, it has much higher corporation tax than we have. And indeed, even with the rises that are in the pipeline. And yet their economy is not tanking in the way that ours is tanking. So I think this question of balancing the books is really fundamental.
Sound bites or sound economics?
Well, we have lower levels of debt than countries like the US, Canada and Japan. So it's simply not true to say that we have particularly high national debt at the moment. But what I do know is that families across the country are struggling to pay their bills. And what I would do is help relieve...
15% interest rates, Liz. I remember those days. I had to pay a mortgage of 15%. Are we going back to that level again?
No, because we've got an independent Bank of England that make decisions about interest rates, and we're nowhere near that position at all. But to say that we're going to put up taxes to the highest level and beyond the highest level in 70 years, and we think there will be no consequences for economic growth, I'm afraid I think that's wrong. And I speak to lots of companies, lots of businesses who are very concerned about the proposals to raise corporation tax. They're very concerned about the level of interest rates. They're very concerned about the regulations on their businesses at the moment. The fact is that Britain has got less competitive relative to other countries. under these corporation tax proposals, we would have corporation tax that is 10 points higher than Ireland.
Yeah.
And it will make us less competitive.
Germany?
And you don't get...
Germany?
Well, Germany has a very, very different economic system from the UK.
OK, we've got time for one more question. Tom from Gateshead. Where's Tom? We'll come back to other questions. Tom, hi, sorry.
Hi, thanks very much. Liz, why did you announce a well-researched and fully costed policy in which you openly said you valued the work of teachers, nurses and police officers in Newcastle, where I work, less than you value those in Guildford, for example? We're having this election because of poor judgment and trust. Why should we trust your judgment?
Well, the reason that I immediately decided not to pursue that policy is it was being misinterpreted, in fact, in exactly the way you said, because it wasn't about teachers or nurses or doctors. And immediately, as there were concerns expressed about this policy, I said we're not going ahead with it. And I do think in politics, there are times when you have to make judgments about what is right, and you have to be honest with the public. And I was very honest about the situation. It wasn't a core part of my policy plank, but I'd rather be upfront, and if there's a problem, make a decision and deal with it straight away. And I think you can see in my time as Foreign Secretary, in my time as Trade Secretary, I've been completely upfront about everything I've done. I've explained why I've done it. I've explained when there is a change, why there is a change. And that's the approach I would take as Prime Minister.
So the press release didn't say that. It said that it would be, in order to reach the 8.8 billion in savings, that it would be expanded out beyond civil service, beyond the civil service itself. So that's a mistake. Will you apologise? Because it was actually quite offensive.
Well, I have been very clear that I will not go ahead with this policy and that I have made a decision to do that straight away. And I've been upfront about that. Okay. I don't think there is anything to be ashamed of saying publicly that this is not working as I wanted it to work, and therefore I have changed the position on it and I'm not going ahead with it.
OK, this gentleman had a view on that. Just wait for your microphone, sir. Can we just get a microphone down here? Thank you. You were shaking your head, sir.
I did, yeah. I hate this apologise, you know, for everything that you might have said. I just really don't understand it. The opposition are always asking other politicians to apologise for what they may or may not have done, and it really doesn't sit well with me.
When somebody's asking for your vote, you don't expect to be offended?
Well,
simple as that.
What's that supposed to mean?
But
you know,
I won't intrude on this.
My point
but, you know,
was, you shouldn't have done.
We are going into very, very difficult times as a country.
Yeah.
And we've just talked about that. And we need somebody leading this country who is prepared to make decisions, who is prepared to deal with issues as they arise, and is prepared to be upfront with the public. And I think I've demonstrated that in everything I've done, in all of the jobs I've held during this campaign.
OK, I'll come back to you, Madam, if I may. If you take a seat, please, Ms Truss. It's time for my go. Everybody ready? Here we are. Glass of water. I wanted to pick up, actually, just where we'd left off there on what the gentleman was asking you about on this press release. We just want to bottom it out so we know exactly where we are. You said that public sector pay policy has been misrepresented by the media. Here's the proposal that you released. Introduce regional pay boards, tailoring pay to the cost of living where civil servants actually work, saving up to £8.8 billion per year. So how have we misrepresented you so far?
Well, what I am clear about is that policy was not about teachers and doctors. But can I be clear, Kay, that I'm not going ahead with this policy?
You can, but you said that you were misrepresented. I'm just clarifying.
Because of the concerns that have been expressed.
OK.
And when something is wrong, when there's an issue, I deal with it.
OK, but just to clarify whether you were misrepresented or not, you highlighted a very specific saving, £8.8 billion. How did you reach that figure?
Well, I don't have the details. And I do think
Well, I can
discussing
tell
a
you-
policy that I'm not progressing
Well, I can
with...
tell you, obviously these people, it's very pressing for these people, certainly some of them. So we just want to bottom it out, and then we're definitely there, and I'm sure you won't have to answer these questions again. It's exactly the same figure, the 8.8 billion, that was issued by the Taxpayers Alliance. They say regional-based pay could allow private sector salaries to catch up with the public sector. This can be done by freezing or reducing pay for existing roles and new positions. In other words, pay cut for nurses, doctors, firemen, police officers in less affluent areas, which is what this gentleman was saying. That wasn't what you were proposing. You've changed your mind.
Absolutely, that was not my intention. But given the concern that was caused, I took an immediate decision not to proceed with this policy.
OK. Ben
And
Houchen.
I am somebody who immediately, if there are issues of concern and those are not delivering what I want to deliver, I will make a decision to do the right thing, and that's what I've done.
Not just this gentleman here, but Ben Houchen, the Conservative Mayor of Tees Valley, said there's no way you can do this without a massive pay cut for 5.5 million people, including nurses, police officers and our armed forces outside of London. Do you accept that you made a mistake by announcing the policy?
I do accept that the way the policy has been interpreted to cover those people was not right, and that's why I took an immediate decision not to go ahead with it.
You offended people, though. You misread the mood. You accept that it was a mistake?
What I've said is I absolutely accept that it wasn't the right policy to deal with this situation, and therefore I withdrew the policy immediately. And I'm somebody who is honest and upfront, Kay. I dealt with the issue immediately after the concerns were expressed about how this policy had been interpreted, and I've dealt with it straight away.
OK, it was a mistake, though.
Well, as I've said, I've withdrawn the policy. We're not going ahead with the policy. So therefore, you know, the points you're making are about a policy that isn't happening.
No, what I'm saying is, should good leaders own their mistakes, or should they blame others?
I'm not blaming
You blame the
anybody
media.
else. I'm not. I'm saying that the policy has been misrepresented by various people. But what I don't want at this time, when people are struggling with the cost of living, is to concern people with this policy, which isn't a core part of my policy platform, and I'm not going ahead with it.
OK, let's talk about the economy, seeing as we've moved on to that. I want to talk to you about your plans to help the worst off, if I may. We've spoken to Selina. She's a single mum in the northeast of England. She works part-time to support her 3 children and earns just over £10,000 a year. What will you do to help her when her energy bills reach £500 a month in January?
So first of all, I'll take immediate action to reverse the national insurance rise. And
won't help her. She earns less than £12,570, so she won't benefit.
Also, the green energy levy will be taken
that's
off fuel bills.
That's £150, and so that's a drop in the bucket, really, isn't it?
And what
Apparently
I will
something
also
like
do,
9 days of energy for her.
And what I will also do is work to increase the amount of supplies we're getting out of the North Sea, so that we can get more gas into our system, so we can move forward on dealing with the energy crisis and energy security.
Not
because
by January,
ultimately, these problems can only be dealt with by, first of all, making sure Putin is defeated by the Ukrainians so that we don't have this energy supply problem, and also by releasing more reserves in the North Sea. I'm also in favour of fracking in areas that support it, so we get more of our own domestic energy supply. But what I can assure you, Kay, is I will do all I can to help people who are struggling with the cost of living. I understand that people are going through difficult times, and if there are any more available resources, of course I would put that to helping people with the cost of living.
Let me tell you what Selina says, if I may. These are Selina's words. I'm really worried about how I'm going to keep my children warm and fed. This is going to cost lives if they don't do something now.
But this is why it's so very important that we offer support to businesses, that we...
It's not going to help her.
Well, it will help her, because the real danger we're in as a country, and this is what the Bank of England has said today, is we're facing a recession. And what a recession would mean is people losing their jobs, businesses going out of business, people struggling across the country. So that's why it's so important we do things like keeping corporation tax low, keeping personal taxes as low as possible, getting getting things like infrastructure projects done quicker to grow the economy. That is ultimately the way we are going to deal with this crisis, is through economic growth.
OK. Here's an idea. What about the windfall tax? Shell posted profits of £9.3 billion between April and June. If we put that another way, Shell made £1,190 per second. So since I started this sentence, they've made £17,000 in profit. Why don't we have another windfall tax?
Well, the problem with a windfall tax is that it might secure money in the short term. But what it does is it puts off companies investing in Britain in the long term, because
BP
they think
said they wouldn't,
they think at any point they could be taxed. And I think that is a problem. What we need to show is Britain's open for business. We're a country that keeps to our word of what our taxes are. And windfall taxes are essentially surprise taxes that companies don't know that are happening. What I would do instead, Kay, is make sure we're incentivising the likes of Shell to be releasing more resources from the North Sea to actually help the problem that we face, which is a lack of energy supply.
The head of BP said that his business would continue to invest if there was another windfall tax.
It's not just BP, though. It's the signal that it sends to every business across the country that the government is willing to give you a surprise tax. And I think that is a problem for Britain. I've already talked about how our corporation tax rate is uncompetitive compared to other countries. If we also have a reputation for levying a surprise tax on any industry that makes a profit, that is a big problem for our country.
Shell is giving their shareholders £6.5 billion. People at home watching who can't afford to heat their homes come the winter will be horrified at that.
But look at who these shareholders are. These shareholders are often people with pensions, pension funds. Shareholders are not, all sort of men in suits sitting in offices. There's no such thing as free money. And I just think we've got to be very careful. If the UK gets a reputation for arbitrarily taking money in tax that we've not sort of done through the official tax system, I think that's a problem.
OK, let's move on to foreign affairs. We've talked about it a little bit. Do you want a sip of water?
Yeah.
You're very welcome. Talking about Taiwan, I'm sure that we've all seen, haven't we, what's been happening in Taiwan over the last few days. As Foreign Secretary, you told a select committee last month that we should have armed Ukraine earlier. Should we arm Taiwan now?
Well, what we do need to make sure is that democracies like Taiwan are defended. And yesterday I put out a statement with my fellow G7 foreign ministers about the very difficult situation in Taiwan and concern about the rhetoric that we're hearing from China, the escalatory rhetoric. Of course, we have a very secure control system for exports in the United Kingdom, and we do licence exports to Taiwan at the moment, exports that are provided by the private sector.
So should we arm them or not?
Well, what I'm saying is we already licence equipment to go to Taiwan.
OK.
And it's a long-standing policy of the UK government to do that.
OK, you said to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in June, month before last, we should have done things earlier. We should have been supplying the defensive weapons into Ukraine earlier. We need to learn that lesson for Taiwan. Every piece of equipment we have sent takes months of training. So the sooner we do that, the better. So just to clarify, we do licence arms that go there, but that is as far as we're going to go at this stage.
Yes, that is as far as we will go at this stage. But we are working with our allies very closely on this because there are countries like the United States, Japan, who also are extremely concerned about the future of Taiwan. And what we need to do is work collectively. And I have championed the G7 acting together as an economic NATO to challenge some of China's economic coercion practices, but also to make sure we're looking at the security situation and making sure democracies like Taiwan are protected. I'm sure you can understand, Kay, that I can't go into every detail of those conversations
because I want
on
you to just,
TV.
Sure.
But it's a very important principle that we do not allow aggressors to invade democratic places.
We've seen Nancy Pelosi, another strong, influential woman in Taiwan this week. Will you visit Taiwan if you're Prime Minister?
We currently have a long-standing...
So yes or no question, really?
No. We have a long-standing position that the Foreign Secretary, the Ministry of Defence and the Prime Minister don't visit Taiwan.
Let me talk to you about Ukraine. Was it an error of judgment to say you'd support Brits going to fight in Ukraine?
What I was very clear about is that I supported the cause of the fight in Ukraine, but I've always been clear that the travel advice is that British people should not go to Ukraine.
No, what you said was, I do support that when Zelensky called for international volunteers. Ukrainians are fighting for freedom, not just for Ukraine, but the whole of Europe. And you did support Brits going to Ukraine to fight.
Well, what I supported...
You had to be corrected by your own Defence Secretary.
What I was saying is that I supported the cause in Ukraine.
OK. Your Foreign Office website said Brits travelling to fight in Ukraine could be committing an act of terrorism. Did you know that when you said it?
Well, what I've said is that I support the cause in Ukraine, and actually I've done a lot of work to support British citizens who have been detained in Ukraine, who've been there in the long term, and the Foreign Office has provided those people with
support. Are you sorry that people misinterpreted what you were saying?
Well, what I have said is that the advice was very clear, the travel advice was very clear, and I announced that publicly, that people shouldn't go to Ukraine. But I think what is happening...
It wasn't very clear, because we spoke to people in Poland who were going into Ukraine, who were Brits that had crossed the border and were then subsequently going into Ukraine.
Well, there have been many British people going into Ukraine during the war, but we are very clear about our travel advice.
OK, I've got some quick-fire questions for you, if I may. Here we go. In your first meeting with the Queen, will you apologise for wanting to abolish the monarchy?
Well, I've already met the Queen, and she's been far too polite to raise that issue with me, and I will not be raising it with her.
OK, but if she did, would you apologise?
Well, I was wrong. I was wrong to say what I did at the time.
OK. Will you be apologising to the First Minister of Scotland when you see her?
No, I won't.
What's the naughtiest thing you've ever done?
I'm certainly not going to say that on TV.
Oh, was it that naughty?
Well, my daughters are watching, so I don't want them getting any ideas, Kay.
Yeah. Being Prime Minister is the most invasive, exposed period in any politician's life. Is there anything that you feel that you would want to come clean with the audience here in the studio and at home?
Because there's no one else listening, so it's all fine. I can just tell.
Anything that you need to get off your chest?
I can tell you, Kay, there are no skeletons in my closet. I think everything I've ever said and done is known about very publicly.
Would you remove the whip from Boris Johnson if he's found to have deliberately misled Parliament over Partygate?
I'm not making any prejudgments about that.
Why not?
Well, I'm not making prejudgments. I'll see what the committee says.
But if they say deliberately misled Parliament?
As I say, I'm not making any prejudgments about that.
What one changed?
By the way, I'm very clear he didn't mislead Parliament.
Well, we'll see what the what the committee says. What one change to the system would you make to restore integrity? Because there's a lot of people here in the studio. Thank you. Not just here in the studio, but watching at home as well. You know, integrity has been lost in the Westminster bubble. What would you do to change it?
Well, I think the answer to restoring integrity isn't introducing more rules, because we have endless rules and codes. The issue is about clarity and leadership and doing what you say you will do and following through on your promises. What I would also do as Prime Minister is restore the Chief Whip to number 12 Downing Street. The Chief Whip was moved out by Alistair Campbell and replaced with the Press Office. I think that was a mistake because it reduced the link between the Prime Minister, the Chief Whip and the Parliamentary Party. And I would make sure we had zero tolerance for bad behaviour in the Parliamentary Party, but we're also supporting MPs. Because as you say, you know, being Prime Minister is an exposed job, but actually being an MP at the moment is pretty difficult. You know, there's all kinds of difficult things said about you on social media. You know, it can be very difficult for people's family lives. So at the same time as making sure we have discipline and, you know, making sure people are honest and behave themselves, we also do need to offer MPs that welfare and support
a new ethics advisor. And you stand by if you would. A new ethics advisor.
Well, I will look at the role of the ethics advisor, but you know, I'm somebody who does act with integrity, and I think people have seen that in every job I've done. And I slightly worry about outsourcing ethics to somebody else.
So no
As
ethics
Prime
advisor.
Minister, I should
You'd be in
know
charge of
the
ethics.
difference between right and wrong. And of course, there need to be proper independent complaints procedure. There needs to be proper whistleblowing procedures. But I would want to look at how those things are structured.
OK, you were loyal to the PM despite parties during lockdown, or when he promoted a man who groped colleagues, or when he was rewriting the rules to help out his mates. Throughout that, you stood shoulder to shoulder with a man who has betrayed the office of Prime Minister.
I don't agree with that characterisation, Kay. I supported Boris Johnson for the leadership. I think he did a good job as our Prime Minister. He delivered Brexit. He delivered the vaccines. He also did a fantastic job of leading the free world in standing up to Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. Yes, he made mistakes. That's absolutely true. You know, he said sorry for the mistakes he made, but I think it's completely wrong to characterise him in that way.
I don't know. What does the audience think?
Hear, hear.
Yeah, agreed. No. OK.
I think it's opinion. Opinion is divided on that issue. I think we can hear from people in the audience. But I have worked closely with Boris Johnson. I know the difficult times he went to. You know, he was in very serious trouble when he had COVID. And, you know, it's been a very, very difficult time to be in government. But look, you know, many mistakes were made during lockdown, Kay, you know, by many people. And I just think to sort of say that this was the, you know, crowning problem is not right.
Yeah, some in charge of policy, some not. A final question for you just before we let you go. You were a Remainer, and now you're not. You supported Brits to fight in Ukraine, then you didn't. You wanted to build on the Green Belt, and now you don't. You wanted to abolish the monarchy, and now you don't. You wanted to arm Taiwan, and now I'm not sure if you're saying whether you do or not. You wanted civil servants...
we do provide them with those
You wanted to
facilities.
cut civil servants' pay in the regions, and then you said you didn't. Will the real Liz Truss please stand up?
OK, I'm somebody who, you know, I didn't come from a traditional Conservative background. My first political experience was going on a CND march with my mother, age 7. You know, I then, as a teenager, joined the Liberal Democrats. I'm not sure how much I should be held to account for things I said when I was 18 or 19. But I've always had a belief that we can be a more successful country, that people should be able to control their own lives. I've always believed in the principle of freedom. I've always believed in low taxation. And yes, my views on other issues have developed over time. But show me somebody who has the same views at 19 and 49, and I'll show you somebody who's not capable of original thought. So yes, you know, I have, you know, developed my views. I've considered things differently, and I also listen to people.
OK.
And I think that's important. So what we've been talking about today
out of time. We have to
on
give,
the policy is
I've
listened
Rishi
to
the
people.
same amount of time. I did say, will the real Liz Truss please stand up? You're still sitting down.
That's just because you're trying to get rid of me, Ken.
Please do.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bear with us 1 second. Bear with us 1 second. Thank you. Let's get some reaction from the audience, should we? Gentleman over here, I heard who was shouting out. Gentleman here. Yep, boom. There, sir. Go on.
I was going to say, Liz mentioned about nothing in her closet. She'd mentioned about integrity. Does that mean at some point in the future, if she's proved to have lied about something, she's going to resign?
I don't know. What do you think?
That's why I wanted to ask her.
Who else has got a question? The lady here had her hand up earlier. Yes, madam?
I was just wanting to ask if she actually believed that Boris Johnson's actions had damaged the Conservative Party and their chances in the next general election.
OK. Great question. Have you obviously mostly are, in fact, all of you are going to be people that will be voting for our next Prime Minister. Have you received your ballot papers yet? No, you still haven't received them. You have one person, but most people haven't. OK. Well, Obviously, we're moving on to the next section now of our programme. You'll be able to hear what Mr Sunak thinks, and then we're going to ask you what you think. How does that sound? Ladies and gentlemen, Rishi Sunak.
Hi, Kate.
Have a seat.
Brilliant.
So we're going to do exactly the same as we did with Liz Truss. Is that OK? We're going to start with the questions from the audience, and then I've got some questions for you as well, if that's OK.
All right.
Here we go.
Let's go.
Let's start our first question with Matthew. Matthew from Kent. There he is in the middle there. Matthew.
Good evening. Thanks, Kate. Is there a point that you would stand aside in this campaign, Mr Sunak, given opinion polls are pointing to a dominant Liz Truss win, and also we're seeing daily declarations from big Tory big guns in her favour?
Well, thanks for the question, Matthew, and the quick answer is no. And that's because, well, thank you. and you know what? That's because I'm fighting for something I really believe in, and I'm taking my ideas around the country. I'm talking to all of you, our members across the country, about what I think's best for our country at a really difficult time. And I want to have that debate with people because I passionately believe what I'm saying is right. I want to convince as many people of that as possible, and hopefully I can do that with you all tonight. But you talk about big guns. I mean, I've also had, in the MP phase of this, in Parliament, the most number of MPs support me. Not just in the first round, but in every round since. You talk about big guns coming out. I just had Nigel Lawson this morning, Margaret Thatcher's Chancellor, supporting my approach to the economy. Michael Howard, a former leader of our party, just introduced me at a hustings yesterday. William Hague, another leader of our party, and my predecessor in Richmond and North Yorkshire, all supporting my candidacy. So, look, I think I've got lots of support, but I'm going to fight incredibly hard till the last day of this campaign for each and every one of your votes. The stakes are really high. I'm passionate about what I believe in, and I want to try and convince you all that I'm right.
Anybody else that's going to support Mr Sunak? I'll get a few. You're all very quiet, though. Sir, you've got a question?
Yes, hi. Now, I've been a Tory for the last 30 years, and I did stand for Parliament in 2005. Now, I've been absolutely disgusted with the level of disunity within the Tory party. So, yes, I will be supporting you. But if you do become Prime Minister, how will you ensure that you unite the Tory party so that we can win the next general election?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you asked that. It's a really important point because I think how we select this audience, we're all on the same team, right? We're all part of the same Conservative family, and we are going to need to come back together afterwards. And look, I think you can take some comfort from the fact that not only do I have the most support of MPs in Parliament, that support is drawn from every bit of our parliamentary party. People in the north, MPs in the south, MPs who voted Remain, MPs who voted Leave, experienced colleagues, the likes of which we just talked about in Matthew's question, but brand new MPs as well, MPs in rural areas and urban areas. So that's the breadth of my support, because that's the kind of person I am, that I can build a broad team around me. And that's what I'm going to do in government. I want to make sure that we have a government that represents all the talents and traditions of our amazing party, and you saw some of that on display in this leadership election early on. I want all of you to be able to look up the government and feel a piece of your view of conservatism represented. That's how we're going to bring people back together, because we all know in this room the enemy is not me or Liz or anyone else. Our real opposition is Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and I'm the person who can take the fight to them and win the next election for all of us, because that's what we all want to see, isn't it?
Actually, that's a similar question to Andrew from West London. Where's Andrew? Andrew.
I'm over here.
You're over there as well. Andrew, were you happy with that response?
Well, sort of, but I think historically we have to look at the fact that parties that are divided do not win elections. We are 2 years out, less than 2 years out from a general election. What specifics can we do? What specifics can you do to reunite the party?
Well, Andrew, you're right. We are only a couple of years out from a general election, and that's why getting on with the job as quickly as possible is really important. We don't have time to waste. So it starts day one with building that team that I talked about that does bring people back together around the cabinet table and across government. No more factions, no more who supported who in the leadership contest. We have to put all that aside the moment this contest ends and start looking forward and start delivering for the British people. We've got real challenges, and I'm sure we're going to get to talk about the economy in a minute, but that's the number one challenge. We've got to get the NHS backlogs down. We've got to get to grips with illegal migration. We've got to make sure that we provide more energy for us all at home. There's lots of challenges we've got, and we need to get on and do them fast. So if we've got a brand new team united in purpose to deliver for the British people and focus on the prize of winning the next election, I think that will galvanise minds. I'm the person that can bring people together and lead us to that victory.
Can I come back
very
on this
quickly,
again?
if you wouldn't mind?
So how many people in the current cabinet would you have in your cabinet?
OK, go.
Well, Andrew, look, I don't think you'd expect me to answer that. A, it's premature, as we heard from the first question. I've got a lot of work to do in this campaign, and I'm going to fight for every vote, and that's what I'm focused on right now. But I will tell you, I will build a team that reflects the talents and traditions of our entire party.
OK, the ones that
and
are still
that's what you will be
supporting
able to look up at my government and see yourself and everyone else reflected in
OK,
it.
Claire from Solihull. Claire.
OK, hi there,
Hi,
Rishi.
where are you, Claire?
My question is...
Hi, Claire.
Hi. The security of this country worries me greatly, with all the sabre rattling from Russia, China, Iran and North Korea. So if you become PM, will you commit to increasing the size and budget of our armed forces to make this country once again a force to be reckoned with?
Yes, Claire. The simple answer is absolutely. And I don't want to say once again, because I think we are already a force to be reckoned with. We're an amazing country that projects our values and our influence around the world, supporting our allies. So I don't think we have to think that we're not. We already are, but there's always more we can do. Now, remember, I was the Chancellor who oversaw the largest increase in the defence budget since the end of the Cold War. That's my track record. And actually, I singled out the Ministry of Defence in the middle of the pandemic for a special treatment because they were going through a period where they were looking at future threats. They needed the certainty of knowing that they had the funding to make all those investments in the new technologies that would keep us safe. That's why I gave them special treatment.
That's not what the Prime Minister said. He said that you had to be... Actually, Ben Wallace said the Prime Minister had to overrule you.
No, that's not right. We actually do all these
Ben
things
Wallace
together.
was wrong.
I'm not going to talk ill of any of my colleagues, but ultimately I'm the Chancellor that's responsible for the decisions on how we spend our money, and that's what I did, right? But you don't have to take my word for it there. When it came to Ukraine, what else did we do? I managed to find £2 billion from across government to send to Ukraine to support them so we can help them and protect our values and stand up to Russian aggression. But what I'm not going to do is stand here and give you an arbitrary target. And I know that's what Liz has said in this campaign, and I don't believe in that. I don't think that's the right response to defence spending. I don't believe in arbitrary targets. I believe in taking a threat-based approach. I believe in looking at the threats we face and then allocating spending accordingly. So what I can commit to you, Claire, is this. I will tell you, I will invest whatever it takes to keep you and everyone else in our country safe, because that is the first duty of a Prime Minister, and it's certainly the first duty of a Conservative Prime Minister.
Follow-up from this lady here. Just wait for the microphone, madam, if you would. There we go.
Thank you. You were also the Chancellor that introduced Eat Out to Dine Out at a cost of £850 million. And according to the University of Warwick, that was responsible for an increase of new COVID cases of between 8 and 17%.
Well, actually, that's one study that said that, and I don't think it's right. And it doesn't explain the fact that in almost every other country around Europe, everyone else experienced another wave of COVID, and they didn't all have the same policy. So it's a bit odd to blame that policy for an increase in COVID cases when that happened across Europe and indeed across most of the world. But I tell you what I was thinking at that moment. What I was looking at was a situation where we had hundreds of thousands of largely small hospitality businesses that were on the brink of bankruptcy. Because in this country, everyone was so scared and all the evidence said that no one was going to go back out again. And in an economy like ours, that would have been disastrous. And you know what's worse? 2 million people work in all those small businesses. And those 2 million people are disproportionately young. They're women, they're working part-time, they're people who are coming off unemployment benefit into work. So as a matter of social justice, I wanted to protect those jobs, those families' livelihoods. That's why I did it. And everywhere I go in this campaign, across the country, I have people who come up to me and say thank you for that, because it saved our business and it saved those jobs.
Tom? They like that one, Mr Sunak. Tom from Bury St Edmunds.
I'm right behind you, Kay.
There we go.
I'm always behind everybody.
Tom,
sounded slightly ominous.
I'm so sorry.
I'm a town councillor for Bury St Edmunds.
Oh, brilliant.
Thank you. And we lost our Kings Road NHS dentist. They were brilliant. That was in 2018. Now some of us are going around talking like tube stations. Mind the gap, mind the gap. What can be done? It's 2022. We need NHS dentistry because, frankly, a lot of us cannot afford to go private. And we have fantastic private dentists in Bury St Edmunds, but we need our NHS back. What can you do? How soon can you do it? That's the problem. I'm running out of teeth.
What happened to your teeth? What happened to your teeth?
I lost them.
Well,
oh, goodness.
Yes.
you did.
We're getting an actual view right now of the camera in your mouth. Yikes. Well, actually, it's funny, as I have to say, I have 7 fillings, and that's because I drank an enormous amount of Coke when I was a youngster, so I feel your pain. And we do need good dentistry.
Yeah.
And look, the NHS, first of all, is everyone's #1 public service priority. And I grew up in an NHS household. You may have heard on this campaign, my dad was a GP.
He never mentions it.
And my mum... just checking, you never know, right? And my mum ran a chemist where I grew up. So I spent my time working in that. I understand how important, especially primary care is. But look, if we're going to get to grips with this and make sure that there is money for NHS dentistry, we just have to be bolder about reforming the NHS to get more efficiency out of it. Now, I'm someone who you can absolutely trust with the NHS. I'm someone who did something quite difficult, and that's create a new funding stream to support not just the NHS, but social care, because it does start with putting more resources in to help recover from the pandemic. Was an easy thing for me to do. Lots of people are upset with me about it, but I believed it was the right thing for the country, the right thing to support our fantastic NHS doctors and nurses. But money's not enough. We need to reform things so we can get more efficiency and invest in things like dentistry. I'll give you one example of something that I'm prepared to do, which is a bit bold, it is a bit radical, and not everyone will love it, but I want to show you that I'm going to bring some change, and that's tackling missed appointments. Now, we have over 10 million missed appointments every year, and it's not just GPs, it's in hospitals. At the same time, we've got lots of people sitting there anxiously waiting for treatment. Yeah. And I've said that's not acceptable. So we need to be tougher on missed appointments, because if we are, then if people can cancel them in advance properly, we free up all that extra capacity, and none of us have had to pay an extra penny in taxes to do that.
How's that workable, though?
Thank you.
How's that workable? How's that workable? What about people who can't afford to pay the £10 and they miss so they can't afford to pay their fine? Do they not get treatment in future? What happens?
Well, actually, Kay, as I said it, you don't have to do it on people's first missed. It can be for people who missed a second appointment, because there are just so many that there's a lot of space in the system. And I do think it's right to actually say, hang on, we believe in an NHS that's free at the point of use, but it's not free at the point of misuse. And when people don't show up for appointments, they are depriving other people of treatment that they need. So there's someone equally vulnerable waiting there, sitting on a waiting list, waiting to see their consultant or their GP, and they're not getting that chance because someone else has just not bothered to show up, and that's not all right. And look, there will be some people like you who say, oh, gosh, maybe we shouldn't do that. But if we're not prepared to be...
It's not me saying it, it's the Lancet saying it. The Lancet is saying it's low socioeconomic backgrounds that miss their appointments for all sorts of reasons, and they can't afford these fights.
And you can be compassionate first time, but at the end of the day, if we all want to cut taxes in this country, if we want to find money to spend more on dentistry, we have to be prepared to do things differently, challenge the system, and that's what I'm prepared to do. Because I want to have great healthcare, I want to have great dentistry for you and for my future fillings, but I do want to be able to cut your taxes too. We're only going to be able to do that if we're going to reform things and do things differently. That's the kind of Prime Minister I'm going to be.
You can only be compassionate once. Jeff from Devon. Jeff, where are we, Jeff?
Over here.
Hey, Jeff. Oh, you're all over here today.
Yeah. Gosh,
Hi.
right. Is it Jeff, was it?
Jeff.
Yes, Rishi, yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hiya. Given the problems we've had with borders control and obviously the massive controversy with the Rwanda policy, what's your plan to cut illegal channel crossings?
Yes, great question, and something I've been talking a lot about over the last couple of weeks. Look, I'm the product of this country's extraordinarily compassionate approach to welcoming immigrants to our shores. My family are beneficiary of that, probably others in the audience, and it's something that we should all feel really proud of. It's something that Britain is amazing at, and even most recently, Ukraine, Hong Kong, Syria, Afghanistan, we showed our compassion. But it is also absolutely right that we have control over our borders, because all the people I just mentioned came here legally, and what is not right is for people to break the rules and come here illegally. The scenes we see on our TV screens and small boat crossings are wrong, and they need to stop. And I'm prepared, again, to do some different things, to be bold and radical, to stop them. There's a 10-point plan on my website with a video, so you please go and have a look at that tonight, and anyone else that's interested in this topic. I'll give you 2 examples of things that I'm prepared to do now. One is we need to change the definition of asylum and move away from this European definition, which has become very broad It's exploited by lefty lawyers and means it's very hard to remove people. I suggest moving to a different definition, another legal standard internationally used by, I think, the Australians and others, and that is a much tighter definition and will allow us to reject more people. So that's one thing we can do. The second thing is we've got to get smarter about our foreign policy. At the moment, we'll happily talk to a country and talk about the trade deal we're going to give them and maybe even the aid that we're going to send that country, but we don't then also say, hang on, you have to take back your failed asylum seekers. Well, that's not right. We should be more joined up. We should be tougher about that. So that's just two of the things in my 10-point plan. But fundamentally, we must get a grip of this. We have to make the Rwanda policy work. I will do whatever it takes, including legal changes if required, to make it work so we get control of our borders. Although we're a compassionate country and will always be, it's entirely right, and many of us voted Brexit for this reason, that we are in control of who's coming here. That's a simple thing, and I will deliver it as PM.
OK. Applause on that one. Gentleman there, really quickly, because we need to move on. If we can just stretch over with the microphone for you, sir. There we go. Your question, really quickly.
So we currently have a points-based immigration system. Do you propose any changes, or are you happy to keep it as it is?
So look, on immigration, we have to tackle this question of illegal, Jeff's question on illegal migration. We should tackle that robustly and radically, so that's part one. Now, with the rest of immigration, right, there's a couple of things. I want to be pragmatic about this. So I want to make sure that we're also supporting our economy to grow. And that means having an immigration system that actually welcomes the best and the brightest from around the world. Because if we want to grow our economy, if we want people here who are going to set up companies of the future, who are going to come and research in our universities, who are going to come and work at some of our fastest growing companies, actually, we want to have a visa regime that makes us the best place in the world for all those people to come. I started reforming the system as Chancellor, and as Prime Minister, I want to finish the job so that the best and the brightest, wherever they are around the world, America, India, Brazil, wherever, they think, the UK is the place I want to come. Because if we can attract them here, it's going to be good for all of us, it's going to be good for the economy, and that's something that I want to deliver.
OK, we've got a question from Alexander on trust. Alexander, you've got a question for us. Alexander's just
Hi,
here.
Alexander.
Yeah, good to see you, buddy. What does honesty mean to you in politics and leadership?
Great question. So look, honesty, in a sense, it means telling you the truth, right? And even when that's not easy. And I think you can see in this leadership election, that's what I'm doing, right? And that first question at the beginning of how I'm doing in the polls and all of that, right? I am saying some things that are maybe not the easiest thing in the world to hear. I'm not sitting here or standing here promising you tens and tens of billions of pounds of goodies straight away, because I don't think that's the right thing to do for our economy. I think it's risky. I think it risks making the inflation problem far worse and costing you all far more. And you know what? My life would be far easier if I wasn't saying that, right? But I want to be honest with you. I want to be straight with a country about the challenges we face and what is going to be required to fix them. And that's why I think you can trust me on this, because I'm prepared to do that, even though it's going to cost me politically.
Et tu, Mr Sunak, though. Et tu, Mr Sunak. We've seen the images of what you were allegedly... Nadine Dorries, I think it was, who came up with this. I don't know, has anybody seen it? Yeah. Stabbing you in the back. I mean, how do you respond to that?
Sorry, Kate, what do you...
Well, my point is we're talking about trust. You can't be trusted.
Which bit
is what Nadine Dorries...
You knife in Boris for your own interest.
There you go.
Right, perfect. Right, OK, let's address that. That's actually great that you've raised it. Sorry, what was your name, sir?
Stephen.
Stephen, right. So, yes, I worked with the Prime Minister for a couple of years, and I'm really proud of the work we achieved together, actually, and I think he deserves enormous credit for what he achieved during that time. And as I said, I'm proud to have been a part of it, and he gave me the job I had, and I'm grateful to him for it. But it got to a point where it was too difficult for me to stay. Now, we had well-documented differences of opinion on economic policy, as you can see in this leadership campaign, by the way, and it's simply impossible for a Chancellor and Prime Minister not to be on the same page when it comes to economic policy. That doesn't make sense, and there's no way that can work. So, of course, I had no choice but to go. But also, it came to a point where the government was on the wrong side of an ethical problem that I could not defend. And enough was enough for me. But it wasn't just me, Steve. It was 60 other members of Parliament all left the government at the same time, because for them, enough was enough.
Okay.
And that's why we're here, because we need to change things.
In December last year, did they, Rishi? You've been campaigning for a long time, and it was perfectly timed, a cynical motivation to try and get you into number 10.
No, that's just simply not true. So I was due to give a speech with the Prime Minister the next week, and in the conversations about putting that speech together on the economy, it was clear our differences were too big to reconcile.
Okay.
So that was the reason. Plus, I think let's not look at the bars with rose-tinted spectacles here. Everyone remembers what was going on with Chris Pincher, right? That was a serious ethical question that the government was on the wrong side of again, and I couldn't defend it. Maybe you're OK to defend that. I wasn't OK to defend it. 60 other members of the government were not OK to defend it because it was wrong. And that's why we're here, because we need to change things. We need to bring trust and integrity and decency and honesty back into politics.
Okay.
And that's what I want to do as Prime Minister.
OK, I'm going to have to brush up on my Shakespearean references, I can tell. Let's bring in David from London, finally. Where are you, David? David's here. Hi, David, go on.
Hi, Kay, thank you.
David, hi.
Good evening, Mr Sunak. How will you balance the need to address the escalating cost of living crisis, particularly for those that are on lower incomes, alongside the need to keep the economy in good order and national debt not spiralling out of control?
David, your question is actually the most important one facing the country right now, right? And I'm sure many of you saw what the Bank of England had to say today. And we in the Conservative Party need to get real and fast, because the lights on the economy are flashing red and the root cause is inflation. Now, I'm worried that Liz Truss's plans will make the situation worse. And what I want to do is different. I think the government's #1 priority should be grappling with inflation. That's what I want to do. I also want to help people with the cost of living over the autumn and winter, particularly, as you said, the people who most need our help. And that's what I announced as Chancellor. That's how I acted over the past 2 years. That's what I'll do as your Prime Minister. That's what a Conservative government should do, support those who need our help most at a time of need. But then also, I want to grow the economy. And I want businesses to be producing more. And that's how we're going to not just grow the economy and create jobs, it's how we're going to get inflation down over time. I've got a plan to do all of those things. But it all starts with not making the situation worse. Because if we just put fuel on the fire of this inflation spiral, all of us, all of you, are going to just end up with higher mortgage rates, savings and pensions that are eaten away, and misery for millions. I don't want that to happen, and that's why I am so focused on gripping inflation first.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, Mr Sunak, have a seat.
All right, thank you.
Need any water?
Yes, why not? Right.
Excellent. Right, my turn. Here we go. Let's talk about the economy to start with, should we? Today, as was being pointed out, the Bank of England saying that we're going to be in recession before the end of the year, and that's going to last until 2024. People watching at home, and I'm guessing some people here as well, facing months and months of hardship. You've been their Chancellor for the last 2 years. Why on earth should they trust you with the keys of number 10?
In fact, because they've seen me as Chancellor over the last couple of years, and I think, actually, Kay, probably the first time people really saw me was that first press conference when there was an enormous amount of anxiety in the country about what was going to happen to people's jobs, their livelihoods, their businesses, and they didn't really know who I was. I'd just been made Chancellor a couple of weeks before. But I stepped up at that moment to act boldly and radically, to design things that had never been done before in this country, like furlough, that ended up protecting over 10 million jobs, saved over 1 million businesses, helped families get through what are 2 very difficult years, and for our economy to emerge at the end of that in far more resilient shape than anyone had anticipated at the beginning. And when I go around the country, people know that that's what I did for them. They're grateful for it, and that's what I want to do as Prime Minister, because right now we face similarly large economic challenges, and it's particularly because of my experience that I'm well placed to deal with them.
Nothing you can do about recession, though, is there? Or is there?
Of course there is. Of course there is. Back to David's question, the #1 thing we have to do is not make the situation worse. What is causing the recession? Right? As you heard from the Bank of England today, and I think Liz said something before, which I'm just going to correct, it's not the tax burden that is causing the recession. That's simply wrong. What's causing the recession is inflation. Right? That's the root of the problems we have, not just here, but in America and elsewhere. So the way we're going to get through this, first and foremost, is gripping inflation. Now, we will, and I always have stood by people, as you've seen me over the last couple of years, so I will help people get through the autumn and the winter, as I've done before, and then we will make the right reforms to help grow the economy in the long term. And I don't think the corporate tax proposals...
So you would come up with more money to help people get through the hardship?
Of course I would.
Do you know how much?
Well, we'll have to see the size of the problem. But look, people can see
13.3% inflation is what's predicted. That's
and
the size of the problem.
And I don't want that to be worse. and I don't want it to last longer. So what I'm not going to do is embark on a borrowing spree worth tens of billions of pounds, put that on the country's credit card, ask our kids and our grandkids to pick up the tab, because that's not right, it's not responsible, and it's certainly not conservative.
But you're promising tax cuts without knowing where inflation will be.
I'm the one that's not sitting here now, promising tens of billions of pounds of unfunded tax cuts.
What you've actually said is no tax cuts until inflation gets under control. What amounts to under control?
When it's on a clearly downward trajectory and we have good line of sight that it is returning back to target, right?
OK.
Right. But, that's why we need to be really careful about policies that will make that worse, right? And look, if that took the first question, I'm behind in this race.
No, I'm just a bit confused. So you're saying these income tax cuts might not happen? It depends.
You're talking about my longer-term plan?
Yes, of course I am.
Yeah, my longer-term plan, I'm confident we can deliver it, yes, right? And that was the reason I published that longer-term plan. And that longer-term plan, for those watching, was to, over time, reduce income tax rates in this country, because I believe really strongly in rewarding hard work. Hard work is a value that I think is really important. I think most Conservatives share that view, that hard work is something that should be rewarded. The best way to do that through the tax system is to reduce the rate of income tax. And I wanted to give people a sense of the direction of where I wanted to take the country and the economy. And I want to build an economy where we cut the rates of income tax over time. And we're going to do that not by asking our kids to pick up the bill. We're going to do it by being disciplined on public spending,
reforming
public services,
where you're very comfortable
and growing
we know
the economy.
exactly what you think. What we don't probably know about is foreign affairs as much. So let me ask you about energy and food bills and how that relates to foreign affairs potentially. How high do you think that energy and food bills will have to go before we reassess our support for Ukraine?
No, I don't think that's how we're going to look at it, actually, because we can make an enormous difference between now and actually next winter in reducing our dependence on Russian energy. So in the short term, of course, we're going to step in, and I want to step in and help people more. I announced enormous support as Chancellor. As Prime Minister, I'll go further because the situation has deteriorated. But what I'm looking to is, by next winter, that we've got through this. And there's lots of things we can do to help us do that. So I'll give a couple of examples, right? So one thing we can do is improve our energy storage, because actually we can import lots of gas in the middle of the year.
That takes time, though, doesn't it?
No, we can do that relatively quickly, improved energy storage during the middle of the year. But the other thing we can do is energy efficiency. Now, many of you here, many people watching, are living in homes where we can help improve the insulation. Loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, smart temperature controls. Those are relatively small-scale interventions that don't take very long or cost a fortune, and government has got money. But if we turbocharge that programme, we can not only reduce our demand for energy, which improves our energy security, we can also save people up to £300 on their bills. Now, that's the type of thing that we should be doing.
So we can continue to support Ukraine as long as we lag our loft, is that what you're saying?
We need to be lagging our loft anyway for climate change reasons, right? Because it's good to reduce our long-term demand on energy, right? But what we do want to do is make sure we help people with their bills, and that's a good practical example of something we can do.
On the conflict in Ukraine, Boris Johnson has really thrown himself into the cause. I think everybody might agree with that. He's regarded as a hero, apparently, in Ukraine. That's what he tells us. He brandishes his missile launchers. We've seen that. Are you really tough enough to stand up to Vladimir Putin?
Well, just think for a moment. How are we currently standing up?
This is your hell yeah moment.
Yeah. So how are we standing up to Vladimir Putin? Right? How are we actually doing it? We're doing two things. Right? We're sending arms and money to Ukraine, which, as we talked about earlier, I found from elsewhere in government spending so that we could free up that money to send to President Zelensky. But what's the other way we're weakening Russia? We're doing it through economic sanctions. Right? We're not sending our troops into Russia. Right? It's not diplomatic measures that are making a difference, it's economic. What are we doing? We're targeting his companies, their access to global capital markets, his gold trading, his central bank reserves. That's how we're economically turning the screw on Russia. Who do you think put all those things together? I did with all my finance minister colleagues around the world, working with the Treasury Secretary in America, working with European finance ministers. We designed an international package of economic sanctions that sends a very strong message that we will not stand for his aggression. It's the most stringent set of economic sanctions the world has ever seen, and it is making a difference. And as Prime Minister, I will go further because there's more things we can do. So, yes, I'm tough enough, and I'm already delivering the measures that are actually causing him the most trouble. Thank you.
Ben Wallace, as I mentioned before, said that you had to be overruled on defence spending. Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, reportedly said that you objected to the Rwanda plan during a written discussion between the departments. Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, former Northern Ireland Secretary, has accused you of putting up huge resistance on efforts to override the Northern Ireland Protocol. It looks as though there's a recurring theme there, doesn't there? You say one thing in private and then you say something else for voter consumption. So should we believe them or should we believe you?
Well, look, when it comes to the Rwanda plan, I do believe in the Rwanda policy, but do I ask tough questions when cabinet ministers come to me and say, oh, look, we like to do this new thing? Yeah, because my job is to make sure that yours and everyone else watching and everyone in this audience's money is spent properly. That's part of my job. I wouldn't be doing my job properly if every time some cabinet minister came to me and said, oh, please, can I have X billion pounds to do this new thing? I don't say, whoa, hang on, let me just check that this actually is going to work. Is it worth us spending taxpayers' money on it?
So you think spending £120 million on sending 200 people to Rwanda is good value for money?
Yeah, well, it's a pilot, right? So the pilot bit is expensive. So you're asking now exactly the questions I was asking. So if Priti Patel or anyone else is going to say, oh, now I expressed some doubts about it, it was doubts about how we're going to make the policy work. I believe in the policy, but it's not good enough in government to just announce things. Okay. It's not good enough to put out a press release. It's what you need to do is deliver things. And I think what people saw from me during the pandemic as Chancellor, that I could deliver things. I actually delivered policies that worked and made a difference, which, by the way, were done in record time and were radical. And I will bring that same sense of grip and urgency and competence to all these other challenges, whether it's the Rwanda policy, whether it's the NHS backlogs.
OK, let's talk about climate. You brought it up. We're trying to whiz through these topics as best we can, because obviously some of these people have not got their ballot papers yet, some have, and what you're telling them, both here in the studio and at home this evening, could make the difference as to whether or not you are the next Prime Minister of this country. So let's talk about the climate, should we? One issue that affects not just our finances, but of course our future, is your green credentials. Can I test them?
Sure.
Here we go. New coal mines, yes or no?
They're local decisions, but I don't think we should be importing coal from other places if we have it at home.
OK. What about fracking?
Where it has the support of local communities, I'm in favour of it.
OK, but we have seen some big issues with fracking, haven't we, particularly in my part of the world, in the northwest of England, where we've seen at least 3 earthquakes that apparently have been caused by fracking.
Yeah, but we also, as I said, most importantly, it has to be done with the support of local communities. But we do also have a study from, I think 3 different royal societies. I think of geologists and engineers and I can't remember the third group, but it's online somewhere, all of whom said that they believe fracking is safe and the seismic activity is not out of the ordinary. They're all the scientists who have came to that conclusion, not me. But as I said, I'm supportive of it where we can bring the local community along with us, because if we can get it to work, it's good for our long-term energy security.
Would you raise flight taxes?
Would I raise?
Flight taxes?
No.
Why not?
Well, because as Chancellor, I already made a change to airline taxation.
You did. Not very green, though, was it?
Yes, it was, actually, because I
why?
did 2 things. One is I reversed a European rule that forced us to charge people twice when they flew inside of the United Kingdom on air passenger duty. I didn't think that was right, and after we left the EU, we could say we're not going to do that anymore. If you fly around the UK, because we believe in a United Kingdom, you should only be taxed once. But at the same time, I created a new band. For the longest haul flights, the most polluting flights, we created a brand new band with a higher level of tax. So actually it was balanced, right? So for the people who are flying the farthest with the more emissions, they were going to pay more. For people flying within the United Kingdom, we took an advantage of Brexit and cut taxes there.
Let me ask you about onshore wind, yes or no, because I'm a bit confused on this one. Offshore wind, onshore wind, forgive me, yes or no?
No.
OK, you've changed your mind?
No, I haven't. Last night I was asked a question, I didn't fully understand it and I misspoke, but my position on that is the same as it's been.
OK, how are we going to get to net zero by 2050?
With innovation.
Yeah.
Right? And the type of future economy that I want to create is one where this, and we talked about it in the answer to the visas question from someone.
Okay.
If we have an economy where this is the best place in the world for people to create, invent, discover new things, we will get there. And we will get there in a way that lowers people's bills. Now, look, my business background, my experience means I know how to build that type of economy in this country.
We've got to rush through this. It's like running
well,
for a bus.
That's important on net zero.
Yep,
but
quick fire.
There's an enormous opportunity
quick fire questions
there.
Here, if you don't mind. Quick fire questions. Here we go. Do you personally support the 24-week limit on abortion?
As a personal thing, yes. I mean, these are personal decisions. They're not government decisions. I don't think there's any need to change I believe in a woman's right to choose. I don't think there's any reason to change the laws that we have.
Why have you abstained on every major vote on abortion?
Probably because I've not been in Parliament on the day.
You didn't think it was important enough to be there?
Because as Chancellor, I'm often travelling.
2015, apparently. Were you Chancellor in 2015?
No, but I mean, these are not free. I mean, I completely agree with our current system of abortion. I don't think it should be changed.
Okay.
So if the vote, I mean, so that's my general view. That's always been my view.
You just haven't been there when the votes have been taking place. Would you fist bump the Saudi leader Mohammed bin Salman as Joe Biden did?
I'm probably not a fist-bumping type of person, I think, probably.
Would you shake his hand, then?
I mean, yes, I would shake his hand. I think you do have to engage with people around the world. I don't think... and they're a country that we have a relationship with.
In a video, here it comes, from 2001, you said you didn't have any working-class friends. Have you made any working-class friends since you left university?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was a student when I said that. We all say silly things when we're younger. I mean, at the same time, I was, as you know, I was working in my mum's shop. I was out and about, cycling around, running around, delivering medicines to people, all people from all walks of life. But, you know, obviously I was a kid and I said something silly.
So you do have working-class friends now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't go around asking them what how they define themselves. I mean... I'd rather think we've kind of moved... I think we've moved beyond that as a country, actually.
How reassuring.
Yeah, I think people are less interested in where you've come from, people are interested in where you're going, and that's the kind of country I want to build, right? Where... Thank you, yeah. Right.
Let me ask you the same question that I asked Liz Truss about being Prime Minister being the most invasive, exposed period in any politician's life. Anything you want to tell us about?
No. I mean, look, I've had a relatively high-profile job for 2 years, and I think people have seen me in action, and they've seen, what I can do, they've seen... And look, much of my personal life has also been talked about earlier this year, and that was an experience that I took, that I learnt from and dealt with. So, yes, I'm used to the scrutiny.
Okay. Another simple question. Have you ever benefited financially from the use of tax havens?
No.
A venture capital firm you co-founded, Telman Partners, was registered in the Cayman Islands. So just to clarify,
I personally have
absolutely
never ever benefited and have paid absolutely full normal taxes wherever I've lived.
Did you set up that business?
No.
OK, so you weren't a co-founder in 2009?
Not of the bit in the Cayman Islands that you're referring to. I have nothing to do with.
OK.
I mean, I happen to work with a company that has multiple offices all around the world, but that's not my responsibility. It was not running the company or setting that up.
So you weren't in any way paid by that offshore company? No connections with it?
When I was living in America, I paid all my taxes in America, and when I've lived in the UK, I've paid all my taxes in the UK. As completely as anyone else would.
OK, the reason I'm asking is that, as you know, as all our audience know, you've had to clarify your wife's non-dom status. You held permanent residency in the United States while you were setting the taxes of British voters, which is what a green card means. You're building a swimming pool at your constituency home while the public pool in Richmond is facing closure after a 400% energy hike. This has all led to a perception problem for you. People feel that you can't walk a mile in their shoes because you're walking in your Prada shoes. What would you say to them?
So, look, over the past couple of weeks, right, I've been out and about across the country talking to members of the public, and as I was saying, lots of people have come to talk to me about that press conference and furlough and what difference it made to their lives. Do you know, I was wearing the same suit in that press conference, the same shoes as that I'm wearing now, right? I'm the same person.
How much were they worth?
Yeah,
They're very slick.
I'm exactly the same person. Right? I'm the same person that stood there and made sure that we helped the country through a very difficult time. And that's what I'll do as Prime Minister. And I think the British people judge people by their character and by their actions, not by their bank account. Thank you.
That certainly seems to be the case as far as the audience is concerned here, but there's plenty of people who are watching at home who would disagree with that. Perception is reality, and they think that you're too rich to be Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, the reality is one of the last things I did as Chancellor was announce significant help for people with their energy bills this autumn and winter. And to the question we had at the front, from David, I think it was, right? David's question was about helping the most vulnerable, right? People who really needed help. That's what I did. Because, look, we're all going to have a difficult time, and inflation makes everyone poorer, and that's why I'm so concerned about policies that will make it worse and last longer, and that's not right. But when we do need to help people this autumn and winter, our focus should be on the people who most need our help. And actually, you know, when Liz is sitting here saying she's going to scrap the NHS levy, do you know who that benefits? That benefits the top 15% of earners, right? That's what that policy does. It's not going to help the people that David was asking about with the cost of living this winter, right? The policies I announced as Chancellor are targeted on those people because they are the people that need our help, right? It's going to be really tough. It's going to be really tough for lots of people. And much as I want to support them to work hard and do those things, right, it's going to be just impossible for some people, and we need to help them, and that's what I did.
You can't do all of that on your own. Penny Mordaunt has backed Ms Truss. Ben Wallace has backed Ms Truss. Nadeem Zahawi has backed Ms Truss. Tom Tugendhat has backed Liz Truss. Sajid Javid, your old boss, has backed Ms Truss. Why are so many people supporting her rather than you?
Right, but Kay, it goes back to the question right at the beginning. Every stage of the parliamentary process, I had the broadest and biggest number of support.
These are the people that have worked most closely with you, and they've decided that they prefer her.
No, well, hang on. Most MPs in Parliament, and all MPs work together in lots of different guises.
These people work around the cabinet table with you day in, day out, and they said, you know what,
actually, Tom Tugendhat and Penny Mordaunt are not in the cabinet, actually. But every single round of the parliamentary process,
would they be in your cabinet?
I led. Right, I was the person that MPs chose every round ahead of everyone else. And since it finished, more and more people have come and joined the team. So I'm really humbled by that, and I'm delighted. And actually, as we were answering a question, that support is drawn really widely from across the parliamentary party. And I'm not going to get into who's going to have this job and that job. I've got a contest that I want to try and win. I want to be out and about talking to all of you about my ideas for the future. But I will build a team that reflects all the talent and traditions of our party, as I said. You saw a lot of that on display in this leadership contest. And as we talked about before, we're all one team. We're all one family. We're going to come together after this. We're going to serve the British people, and then we're going to take it to Keir Starmer and win the next election, because that's the real prize.
Final thought: when you go, when you look at yourself in the mirror at night just before you go to bed, and you think, all these people that have sat around the cabinet table with me, and now they don't want to work with me. They think that the other candidate's better.
But plenty of people sat around the cabinet table also support me. Right, Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister, is out there right now talking about it, and lots of others. But I also, as I said, now answer to the question.
Just him.
Right. I think we only just have one person, right? Yeah, much as we love you and we love Sky, I think that's where we tolerate just one person giving up their evening to come and talk to you later. But I've been really humbled.
Not sure how
actually.
to take that, actually.
Well, you know what? I think
that's
people...
a perfect place to end. It's lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Very nice to see you. Thanks very much.
Stay with us 1 second if you want to stay with us. Thank you. So our candidates have had their chance to make their case, but what do the people who will decide their future make of it? We have a simple question for our audience. Are you ready, audience? We rehearsed this beforehand. After what you have heard tonight, who are you most likely to vote for? As you know, you need to press 1 and then send if it's Rishi Sunak, and you need to press 2 and then send if it is Liz Truss. Are we all ready? Any more questions before we need to do that? Everybody knows exactly what they're going to say and do. Away you go. There we go. So we have 15 seconds when people were pressing 1 for Rishi Sunak or 2 for Liz Truss, and then pressing send. And then, as if by magic, in just a few moments' time, we'll find out what our audience here in the studio thinks about who should be the next Prime Minister of this country. Worth just pointing out at this stage that 0.3% of the electorate will decide our next Prime Minister, which means 99.7% of the electorate will not be doing that. Do you think that's fair?
Yes.
Why do you think it's fair? Gentlemen here, why do you think it's fair?
My ballot paper doesn't say who's the next Prime Minister. We have a parliamentary system. People voted for the Conservative Party, and as members, we're electing the leader. It happens to be that leader becomes Prime Minister. This is a basic understanding of our system.
Thank you. Gentlemen up here, really quickly with a check shirt. Yep,
it's exactly the same as what Labour do when they chose...
OK. Now, as with all things with live television, the technology has crashed. So what we're going to do instead is go with a show of hands instead. Are we happy with that? Yep. So will you allow me to say who I think has probably got more hands? Yep. Thank you. So if you think that Rishi Sunak had a better show and as a result would potentially make the better Prime Minister of this country? Can you put your hand up now, ladies and gentlemen, please? Oh, my goodness. That looks to me like an awful lot for Mr Sunak. Who would prefer Ms Truss as the next Prime Minister? Now, I wasn't expecting that, I have to say, but I think with just keeping your hands up for Ms Truss, while we get some more shots just to show people at home, it looks to me as though Mr Sunak convinced you far more than Ms Truss. And I'm sorry, sir, we're almost out of time, and I have had you let you have a couple of goals. I think the only thing that he probably needs to learn from tonight is to read a bit of Shakespeare. I don't know what you think. Anyway, it's been fantastic to see you all. Thank you so much for taking the time for joining us. Thank you also to Ms Truss and also to Mr Sunak. They were amazing. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. Very, very enlightening conversation and discussion from both of them. Coming up in just a few moments' time, Jane Secker will be talking to both Mr Kwarteng and also Mr Raab. And I will see you very soon. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.